you the same person you were 10 years ago, or someone entirely new? Now, consider a place you once knew, a beach, a mountain, or a river. If you returned, would it be the same? The water constantly flowing through a river makes it perpetually new. This raises the question, when we revisit the past, is it a new person seeing a new river, or the same person and the same river, simply meeting at a different time? The questions we ask about who we are as individuals, as societies, as a species, often find their sharpest expression not in definitive answers, but in enduring paradoxes. Few are more persistent or profound than the Ship of Theseus. Originating in ancient Greek history and philosophy, this thought experiment has sailed through millennia, its simple premise masking a complex and deeply resonant inquiry into the nature of identity, continuity, and change. It is a puzzle that begins with wooden planks and a hero's vessel, but quickly expands to touch every aspect of existence, from the cells in our bodies to the code in our computers. To understand its power is to acquire a new lens through which to view the world, a diagnostic tool for uncovering our most fundamental assumptions about what it means for something or someone to remain the same in a world defined by flux. This exploration begins where the paradox itself was born, in the stories and philosophical debates of the ancient world. The paradox of the Ship of Theseus is inextricably linked to the figure of its namesake, a mythical founder king of Athens, whose life was a tapestry of heroic deeds. Theseus was reputed to be of divine descent, a warrior who combined immense physical strength with a keen intelligence. His most celebrated feat was slaying the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Crete, thereby liberating Athens from a grim tribute. According to the legend, Theseus and the youths he rescued made their triumphant return to Athens aboard a 30-oared ship. This vessel, far from being a mere mode of transport, became a powerful symbol of Athenian heritage and deliverance. In a gesture of profound cultural reverence, the Athenians preserved the ship for centuries as a living monument, a practice that continued down to the era of Demetrius Phalereus in the 4th century BCE. Each year, they would reenact the hero's voyage in a pilgrimage to Delos to honor the god Apollo. However, the relentless passage of time meant the ship's wooden planks inevitably began to decay. To maintain the vessel, the Athenians undertook a process of continuous restoration. As each old plank rotted, they would meticulously remove it and replace it with a new, stronger piece of timber. This practical act of preservation gave birth to a philosophical crisis. The Roman historian and biographer Plutarch, writing in the late 1st century CE, was the one to immortalize the puzzle that arose from this practice. He noted that the ship became a standing example among the philosophers for the logical question of things that grow. The central question was this: after years of this gradual replacement, a point was reached where not a single one of the original wooden planks remained. Is this fully restored ship still fundamentally the Ship of Theseus? This question created a deep philosophical divide. One side contended that the ship was not the same, for its material substance was entirely different. The other side held that it remained the same ship, arguing that its form, its function, and its continuous history as the object revered by the Athenians were what defined its identity. The paradox, as formulated by Plutarch, thus presents a fundamental conflict between two competing criteria for identity: continuity of material versus continuity of form and purpose. The very origin of the paradox reveals a critical layer of its meaning. The question of the ship's sameness did not arise in a vacuum of abstract logic. It emerged from a real-world cultural practice driven by value. The Athenians preserved the ship because it was a sacred artifact, a tangible link to their mythical past and their identity as a people. The paradox matters precisely because the ship matters. This suggests that any attempt to solve the puzzle must first consider why the question of identity is being asked. The criteria we choose to prioritize, be it material composition, historical lineage, or functional purpose, are often dictated by the value we place on the object and the reason for its preservation. Long before Plutarch documented the specific puzzle of the ship, the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus, circa 535 C, 475 BCE, had already laid the philosophical groundwork for understanding identity in a world of constant change. Heraclitus is most famous for his doctrine of universal flux, the idea that reality is not static, but is in a perpetual state of transformation. This concept is captured in his iconic, though likely paraphrased fragment, "You cannot step into the same river twice." At first glance, this statement seems to argue for a radical impermanence, suggesting that because both the river's waters and the person stepping into them are constantly changing, no identity can persist through time. This interpretation would offer a swift, if unsatisfying, answer to the ship paradox. The ship ceases to be the same ship the moment the first plank is replaced. However, a more nuanced understanding of Heraclitus's philosophy reveals a far more sophisticated and powerful idea. Heraclitus did not believe change was purely chaotic. He proposed that the universe is governed by an underlying rational principle or structure he called the logos. This logos is the stable, ordering force that ensures the world's continuous transformation follows a logical and natural order. The most authentic version of the river fragment, found in the writings of later philosophers, states, "On those stepping into rivers, staying the same other and other waters flow." The crucial phrase here is "staying the same." This suggests that the river's identity, its riverness, is not contingent on its water being static. On the contrary, a river remains a river, precisely because new water is constantly flowing through it. If the flow were to cease, it would become a stagnant lake or a dry bed. It would lose its identity as a river. This reframes the entire concept of identity. For entities like a river, a burning fire, or a living organism, identity is not a static state, but a dynamic process. Persistence is achieved not in spite of change, but through change. The sameness of the river lies in the continuity of its form and the pattern of its flux, all governed by the logos. Applying this Heraclitean lens to the Ship of Theseus offers a compelling resolution. The ship is not merely a collection of wooden planks. It is a structured entity with a specific form and function. Its identity is not necessarily lost as its material components are replaced. Rather, its identity can be seen as being maintained through the very process of repair and renewal. The ship's continuous existence, its unchanged design, and its enduring purpose as a cultural monument constitute its logos. From this perspective, the Athenians were not destroying the ship's identity by replacing its planks. They were actively preserving it, ensuring the river of the ship's existence continued to flow. This shifts the focus from the material what to the structural and functional how, suggesting that for some things, to change is to remain the same. The philosopher Plato, circa stad vacet osma, c. 348 BCE, a student of Socrates, offered a radically different approach to the problem of identity, one that bypasses the messy details of the physical world altogether. Central to his philosophy is the theory of forms, or ideas, which posits the existence of two distinct realms. The first is the physical world we perceive through our senses, a world of constant change, imperfection, and decay. The second is a transcendent, non-physical realm of forms, which are the perfect, eternal, and unchanging essences of all things. According to Plato, for every object or quality in our world, be it a dog, a mountain, courage, or a ship, there exists a corresponding perfect and absolute form. The physical objects we see are not truly real. They are merely shadows, imitations, or imperfect copies participating in these true forms. For example, every physical table is just a flawed representation of the one, perfect, eternal form of tableness. When viewed through this Platonic framework, the Ship of Theseus paradox dissolves, or rather, is revealed to be a misguided question. The debate over whether the original ship or the repaired ship is the true Ship of Theseus is fundamentally flawed because neither is. Both are mere physical manifestations, imperfect copies of the single, unchanging form of the Ship of Theseus that exists in the transcendent realm of ideas. The true identity of the ship does not reside in its decaying wooden planks or its restored timber, but in the perfect, eternal blueprint that defines it. While this solution may seem abstract and metaphysical, it provides a powerful conceptual framework that prefigures many modern ideas about identity. Plato's theory effectively separates the idea of a thing from its physical instance. This distinction between the blueprint and the building has profound contemporary relevance. For instance, the identity of a software program like Microsoft Word is not tied to any specific installation on a physical computer. It lies in its underlying source code, its form. The identity of a franchise like McDonald's is not in any single restaurant, but in the system of branding, recipes, and operational procedures, its form. The identity of a piece of music is not in any one performance, but in the musical score, its form. Plato's solution, therefore, offers a way to anchor identity in something non-material and enduring. It suggests that the real ship is the design, the information, the set of principles that allows it to be constructed and reconstructed. In any context where the design or concept is more important than the material embodiment, the Platonic view provides a robust criterion for identity. The physical ship may change and decay, but its essential identity, its form, remains untouched and eternal. For over a millennium, the Ship of Theseus remained a compelling but contained philosophical riddle about gradual change. It was the 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes who, in his work De Corpore, masterfully escalated the puzzle from a gentle paradox into an acute crisis of identity. Hobbes introduced a simple but devastating twist. What if, as the Athenians replaced the old planks of Theseus's ship, a custodian had been secretly collecting all of the discarded original pieces? Once the Athenian ship was fully composed of new timber, the custodian takes all the original old planks and reassembles them, arranging them in their exact original configuration. Now, two distinct ships stand before us, and both have a powerful claim to the identity of the original Ship of Theseus. Ship A, the repaired ship. This is the vessel continuously maintained by the Athenians. It possesses what can be called spatio-temporal continuity and continuity of form. It has occupied a continuous path through space and time, has always been known and referred to as the Ship of Theseus, and has maintained its function as a commemorative vessel. Its identity is based on its history, name, and structure. Ship B, the reassembled ship. This vessel is constructed from the entirety of the original material. It possesses material continuity. It is made of the very stuff of the original ship. Its identity is based on its physical composition. Hobbes pointed out the logical absurdity that would follow if we grant both claims. If Ship A is identical to the original ship and Ship B is also identical to the original ship, then by the law of transitivity of identity, if A equals C and B equals C, then A equals B. Ship A and Ship B must be identical to each other. But this is clearly false. They are two separate objects. We are therefore forced to choose which one is the real Ship of Theseus. This Hobbesian dilemma weaponizes the paradox. It is no longer a gentle question about a vague threshold of change. By creating a second contender, Hobbes eliminates ambiguity and forces a decision, exposing a fundamental contradiction in our intuitive understanding of identity. We are forced to confront the fact that two of our most basic criteria for sameness, sameness of form and sameness of matter, can come into direct conflict. This transformation of the paradox from a riddle into a test is Hobbes's most significant contribution. It provides a powerful diagnostic tool that can be applied to any domain where identity is in question. Whenever we face a complex problem of persistence, we can construct a Hobbesian scenario to clarify our underlying values. For example, in the context of a business, is the real company the one that retains the name, mission, and headquarters, but replaces all its employees, Ship A? Or is it the new startup founded by all the original key employees who left, Ship B? In the context of law, is a person defined by their continuous body, Ship A, or by some other essence? The choice we make reveals our unstated assumptions about what truly constitutes identity in that specific context. Hobbes did not solve the paradox. He perfected it, turning it into a timeless framework for interrogating the very nature of being. Having explored the philosophical foundations of the paradox, the inquiry now turns inward to the most intimate and pressing question of identity, our own. The human being is, in a startlingly literal sense, a biological ship of Theseus. We persist through time, feeling like a continuous self, yet the physical and mental planks that constitute us are in a state of constant flux. Applying the paradox to ourselves forces a confrontation with the deepest questions of what it means to be a person. Is our identity anchored in the physical matter of our bodies, the stream of consciousness in our minds, or the genetic blueprint that guides our construction? The analogy of the human body as a ship of Theseus is not merely a poetic metaphor. It is a biological reality. Our bodies are composed of trillions of cells that are engaged in a relentless process of death, replacement, and renewal. Scientific research has revealed the staggering scale of this cellular turnover. On average, the cells in a human body are replaced every 7 to 10 years. Every day, approximately 330 billion cells are replaced, which amounts to a total mass turnover of about 80 grams per day, dominated by blood cells and gut epithelial cells. Over the course of about a year and a half, we generate a mass of new cells roughly equivalent to our entire body weight. However, this process of replacement is far from uniform, making the human body a much more complex ship than the one in the paradox. The rate of turnover varies dramatically across different tissues and organs. Rapidly replaced planks. Cells with high exposure to wear and tear are replaced very quickly. The epithelial cells lining the gut are replaced every few days. Skin cells are shed and replaced every few weeks. We lose nearly 500 million of them daily. The most numerous cells being replaced are blood cells, which make up about 90% of the daily turnover by number. Slowly replaced planks. Other components are far more enduring. Skeletal muscle cells can take as long as 15 years to regenerate. Heart muscle cells can last for 40 years, and fat cells have a lifespan of about 8 years. The original planks. Most critically, some cells are almost never replaced and are meant to last a lifetime. These include the neurons of the cerebral cortex, the command center of our brain, and the cells that make up the lenses of our eyes. These are the original timbers of our biological ship. This biological reality profoundly complicates the simple analogy. The common trope that we are a new person every 7 years is a misleading oversimplification. Our body is not a single ship being uniformly rebuilt. It is more like a complex fleet with different vessels being reconstructed at vastly different speeds. The existence of lifelong planks, particularly the neurons that store our memories and constitute our cognitive functions, presents a significant challenge to the idea of complete material replacement. This leads to a more nuanced version of the paradox when applied to human biology. If the ship's most critical components, the captain's cabin, the helm, the navigational charts, the brain, remain original, does it truly matter if the deck, hull and sails, skin, gut and muscle are constantly being replaced? This biological fact suggests that if personal identity has a physical basis, it might be anchored not in the body as a whole, but in these specific, irreplaceable components. Our identity may be a hybrid, defined by the persistence of a core material structure, the brain, that presides over a body in constant flux. The human ship, it seems, is never fully rebuilt, forcing us to consider which parts matter most to its identity. The startling reality of our body's material flux leads to a compelling alternative. Perhaps our identity is not located in our physical planks at all. The 17th century philosopher John Locke, in his essay concerning human understanding, proposed one of the most influential and intuitive solutions to this problem. He argued that personal identity is founded not on the substance of the body or an immaterial soul, but on consciousness, which he defined as the perception of what passes in one's own mind. For Locke, the key to identity over time is memory. You are the same person you were in the past if, and only if, you are conscious of that past self's thoughts and actions. That is, if you can remember them. He states, as far as a consciousness can be extended backwards to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person. This elegantly shifts the anchor of identity from the physical ship to the captain's log, the continuous record of experiences held in memory. This psychological criterion for identity powerfully aligns with our subjective sense of self. We feel we are the same person who went to school as a child or started a new job a decade ago because we remember those experiences. The body can change, the brain cells can be replaced, but as long as this thread of consciousness remains unbroken, personal identity persists. Locke's theory provides a powerful answer to the biological Ship of Theseus. However, it is not without its own profound challenges, which were pointed out by later philosophers like Thomas Reid and Joseph Butler. The problem of forgetfulness. If identity depends on memory, what happens when we forget? Does a person with amnesia cease to be the person who had the forgotten experiences? Locke's theory seems to imply that they do, a conclusion many find troubling. The brave officer paradox, Reid's objection. Reid proposed a scenario. A brave officer, as an old general, remembers his valiant actions in a battle as a young man. As a young man, the officer remembered being flogged for stealing an apple as a boy. However, as an old general, he no longer remembers being flogged as a boy. According to Locke's theory, the general is the same person as the officer, and the officer is the same person as the boy. By transitivity, the general should be the same person as the boy. But since the general cannot remember the boy's experience, Locke's theory implies he is not the same person, creating a logical contradiction. The problem of false memories. The theory struggles to distinguish between genuine and false memories. If a person falsely but vividly remembers being Napoleon, does that make them Napoleon? To say the memory is false because they weren't Napoleon is to use personal identity to define memory, which is circular reasoning if one is using memory to define personal identity. Even with these objections, the Lockean shift from substance to consciousness creates a new and more modern paradox, a conflict between our internal, self-perceived identity and our external, public identity. Locke himself acknowledged that since consciousness is private and accessible only to the individual, human judges and society at large can never truly know if they are judging the same person or merely the same body. This forms the philosophical basis for legal concepts like the insanity defense or statutes of limitation, which acknowledge that a person may not be held accountable for acts of which they were unconscious or with which they no longer have a meaningful psychological connection. The paradox is no longer just a metaphysical puzzle about what constitutes a person. It becomes a practical problem of justice, responsibility, and social recognition. Who is the self that society interacts with? The ship of the body that is publicly visible, or the ghost of consciousness that only it knows? In the modern scientific era, a new candidate has emerged for the anchor of identity, our DNA. The genetic code can be seen as a biological version of Plato's form, the unchanging foundational blueprint from which the physical ship of our body is constructed and continuously repaired. While our cells turn over and our experiences shape our minds, our unique genetic sequence remains largely constant throughout our lives. This perspective suggests that identity resides not in the transient material of the body, but in the information that specifies its form and function. This concept, however, is now being pushed to its limits by technologies that allow us to alter the blueprint itself. The paradox evolves when we move from the passive natural replacement of cellular planks to the active, intentional upgrading of the self. This is the domain of transhumanism, a movement that advocates for the use of technology to enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. Genetic engineering. Technologies like CRISPR allow for the precise editing of our DNA. If we begin to alter our genetic blueprint to eliminate disease, enhance intelligence, or change physical traits, at what point does the modified individual cease to be the same person? We are no longer just replacing the planks, we are rewriting the ship's design plans. Cybernetic enhancement. As we develop advanced prosthetics, neural interfaces, and other forms of human-machine integration, we begin to replace our biological planks with non-biological, often superior ones. An artist like Startling, who incorporates robotic elements into his body, or an artist like Orlin, who uses plastic surgery to transform her face into a collage of art historical features, challenges the boundaries of the natural human form. These technological possibilities transform the nature of the paradox. The original question was one of persistence. Is it still the same ship? The transhumanist future forces a question of authenticity and definition. Is it still a ship at all? If we replace a ship's wooden planks with aluminum ones, it is still recognizably a ship. But if we replace them with advanced materials that allow it to fly, is it now an airplane? Similarly, by intentionally altering our fundamental biological blueprint and materials, we challenge the very definition of human. This shift has profound ethical and legal implications. Some scholars of law have argued that a genetically enhanced individual might no longer be considered human in a legal sense and could therefore be stripped of fundamental human rights. The debate moves from a personal philosophical inquiry to an urgent societal one. The paradox is no longer just about whether you are the same person you were yesterday. It becomes a question about the future of our species, forcing us to define the essential criteria of humanity before we engineer them away. The Ship of Theseus paradox is not confined to the individual. Its principles scale upward, providing a powerful framework for understanding the identity of collective entities. Groups, from corporations to nations, are in a state of perpetual flux, constantly replacing their constituent planks, be they people, ideas, or cultural practices. Yet, they often maintain a strong and continuous sense of identity over decades or even centuries. This section applies the paradox to the collective self, examining how organizations, brands, and nations navigate the tension between enduring identity and constant change. The modern corporation is a quintessential Ship of Theseus. A company like Ford or General Electric founded over a century ago, is still referred to by the same name and is considered the same legal entity, despite having replaced virtually all of its original planks. The employees, from the CEO down to the factory worker, have turned over countless times. The leadership has changed, strategies have been overhauled, technologies have been rendered obsolete and replaced, and even the core products and services offered may bear little resemblance to the originals. What then allows us to say that the IBM of today is the same company as the IBM of the 1950s? This question is at the heart of the field of organizational identity. Scholars define organizational identity as the set of core, enduring, and distinctive characteristics of an organization as perceived by its members. This definition itself mirrors the paradox, sparking a central debate in management theory, the enduring identity proposition, which views identity as fundamentally stable, versus the dynamic identity proposition, which sees identity as fluid and changeable. The most compelling answer is that a corporation's identity is anchored in its abstract, non-physical components, much like a Platonic form or a Heraclitean process. The ship is not the collection of employees or assets at any given moment. It is the organization's core mission, its guiding values, its legal charter, and its unique culture. These are the elements that must persist for the organization to maintain its identity through the constant turnover of its physical and human parts. This perspective reveals a fascinating inversion of the paradox. For a physical ship, the replacement of its planks is a sign of decay and a threat to its identity. For a modern organization, the ability to effectively replace its planks, to adapt to market shifts by changing strategies, adopting new technologies, and refreshing its talent pool is a sign of health and vitality. An organization that cannot change its parts is one that will become stagnant and fail. Therefore, an organization's identity and its very survival depend on its capacity for change. The paradox is not a problem for organizations to solve. It is their fundamental operating model. Successful leadership involves mastering the art of managing this inherent contradiction, projecting an image of stability, reliability, and enduring identity to stakeholders, customers, investors, employees, while simultaneously executing a strategy of constant internal change and renewal. The organization must convince the world it is the same trustworthy ship precisely because it is so adept at rebuilding itself to navigate new and treacherous waters. If organizational identity is the internal, member-perceived answer to the question, who are we? Swing. Then brand identity is the external, consumer-perceived answer to the question, who do we think they are? Branding represents the deliberate commercial management of the Ship of Theseus paradox. Global corporations like Coca-Cola, Nike, and Apple invest billions of dollars to maintain a consistent brand identity across all consumer touchpoints. This practice, known as brand continuity, involves the rigorous and consistent use of logos, color palettes, typography, tone of voice, and messaging. The goal is to build three critical assets: recognition, trust, and credibility. Psychological studies and marketing data show that consumers need to have 5 to 7 consistent interactions with a brand before they reliably remember it. Consistency creates familiarity, and familiarity breeds trust. consumers are more likely to purchase from a brand they recognize and perceive as dependable. In essence, a brand is a company's curated solution to the paradox. While the organization itself, the ship's internal structure and crew, is in a state of constant flux, the brand, the ship's name, its flag, and its distinctive paint job is kept as stable as possible. This curated stability serves to reassure the outside world that, despite any internal changes, the entity remains the same and its promise of quality or experience is unbroken. This creates a symbiotic and at times parasitic relationship between organizational identity and brand identity. A strong, coherent internal culture and mission, a clear organizational identity, makes it far easier to project a consistent and authentic brand. However, this link can be severed and manipulated. A company can undergo radical negative changes to its internal identity. For example, by cutting corners on quality, engaging in unethical labor practices, or abandoning its founding values, while using the power of its stable, continuous brand to mask this transformation from the public. The trusted brand becomes a facade, hiding the fact that the underlying organization has become something entirely different and potentially untrustworthy. This is the dark side of the paradox in a commercial context. The appearance of the same reliable ship can be used to conceal a rotten and dangerously altered structure within. While brand evolution does occur, with even iconic logos and taglines being updated to stay relevant, this is a carefully managed replacement of the most visible planks, designed to signal modernization without shattering the core illusion of continuity. Scaling the paradox to its largest and most complex level brings us to the nation-state. A nation, particularly an immigrant nation like the United States, is a ship of Theseus on a monumental scale. The political scientist Benedict Anderson famously described nations as imagined communities, arguing that national identity is a social construct that unites millions of people who will never meet, but who share a sense of common belonging. The planks of this national ship are its citizens, a population in constant flux through birth, death, and migration. The cultural landscape, including languages, traditions, and values, is also continuously evolving. The political and legal structures are amended and reinterpreted over time. What then is the anchor of national identity that allows a country to persist as the same nation across centuries of profound change? The paradox illuminates the fundamental tension between two competing models of national identity. Ethnic nationalism. This model defines the nation based on a shared heritage, ancestry, language, or blood. It is an identity tied to the original planks of the ship. From this perspective, significant changes to the ethnic or cultural composition of the population are seen as a threat to the nation's core identity. Civic nationalism. This model defines the nation based on a shared commitment to a set of political ideals, laws, and institutions, such as a constitution. It is an identity tied to the ship's form and function, not its material composition. From this perspective, anyone can become a plank in the ship, regardless of their ethnic origin, as long as they subscribe to the nation's civic values. Metaphors for integrating new populations, such as the melting pot, where new planks assimilate and fuse with the old to create a new uniform material, or the mosaic, or transnationalism, where new planks retain their distinct character while contributing to the strength of the whole structure, are attempts to manage this ongoing process of replacement. The contemporary era of globalization has dramatically accelerated this process. The increased flow of people, ideas, and cultures across borders acts as a powerful force, speeding up the rate at which the planks of the national ship are replaced and diversified. This rapid change often creates a societal-level crisis that is a direct manifestation of the Hobbesian dilemma. One political faction may arise to defend an identity based on the original planks, advocating for nativism, cultural preservation, and stricter immigration controls. Another faction will argue for an identity based on the ship's evolving form and its capacity to incorporate new materials, advocating for multiculturalism, inclusivity, and a civic definition of belonging. Much of the political polarization seen in nations across the globe can thus be understood as a large-scale, often bitter, struggle over how to define the identity of the national ship of Theseus as it sails into an uncertain future. The Ship of Theseus paradox finds its most abstract and mind-bending applications in the digital realm. Here, the very concept of matter is replaced by information, and the planks are lines of code, data points, and pixels. This dematerialization does not solve the paradox. Instead, it intensifies it, creating new and unprecedented forms of the identity puzzle that challenge our understanding of persistence, authenticity, and the self. Software applications and artificial intelligence systems are quintessential examples of the paradox in action. A program like Microsoft Word or an operating system like Windows is in a state of perpetual evolution. Through a constant stream of updates, patches, security fixes, and feature additions, its underlying code is continuously being replaced. Is the sleek, cloud-integrated Microsoft Word of today the same application as the clunky Word 95 that ran on a beige desktop computer? They share a name and a core function, but their constituent planks, the millions of lines of code, are almost entirely different. This issue is even more acute with modern AI systems. An AI model is not a static artifact. It is a dynamic system that is constantly being retrained on new data, its algorithms refined, and its architecture updated. The AI that can write a poem today is materially different from the version of itself that could only answer simple questions 6 months ago. The identity of software is such a known hard problem in computer science that the lack of a global system for uniquely identifying software components is a major obstacle to automation and a significant security risk. Fragmented and poorly tracked software identities create visibility gaps in security systems, allowing attackers to exploit inconsistencies between different versions or components of a system. The digital realm introduces a novel twist to the Hobbesian dilemma. In the physical world, the repaired ship and the reassembled ship cannot occupy the same space at the same time. In the digital world, they can. When a major software update is released, the repaired ship with new code, the old version, the reassembled ship made of old code, can continue to exist and run on millions of other machines. This creates a scenario where both of Hobbes's ships can coexist and function simultaneously. This phenomenon is vividly illustrated in popular culture, such as in the Marvel series WandaVision. In the show, two versions of the character Vision exist at the same time. A new Vision created by magic, who possesses the original's memories and personality, continuity of function and consciousness, and the White Vision, who is the original's physical body, reassembled and reactivated, continuity of matter. This possibility of coexisting, branching identities is unique to the informational realm. It suggests that digital identity is not always a matter of choosing one true version over another, but rather of managing a complex, multiplying ecosystem of related but distinct entities, each with a legitimate claim to the original's lineage. The paradox of identity takes on a deeply personal and interactive dimension in the context of virtual worlds, online gaming, and social media. Our digital avatars are infinitely malleable ships that we command. Within these virtual environments, we can replace the planks of our appearance at will, changing our height, our body shape, our gender, our species, and our style with a few clicks. This raises a fundamental question. What is the relationship between our persistent physical self and this curated, ever-changing virtual persona? The connection is far deeper than mere representation. Research has identified a powerful psychological phenomenon known as the Proteus effect, named after the shape-shifting Greek sea god. The Proteus effect describes how the characteristics of an individual's virtual avatar can alter their behavior and self-perception in the real world. For example, studies conducted at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab have shown that people who are assigned taller avatars in a virtual environment subsequently behave more confidently and assertively in real-life negotiations. Individuals given more attractive avatars tend to be more sociable and open to self-disclosure. This phenomenon introduces a recursive feedback loop into the Ship of Theseus paradox. In the classic formulation, the ship is a passive object, and its planks are replaced by external agents, the Athenian craftsman. In the virtual world, we are both the craftsman and the ship. We are actively choosing which planks to replace. The Proteus effect reveals a third layer. The new planks we choose for our virtual ship, our avatar, feedback and actively reshape the identity of the craftsman, our real-world self. Our identity is no longer a one-way street of construction, but a dynamic, co-evolving process between our physical and digital selves. The line between the creator and the creation becomes blurred. The captain is, in a sense, becoming one of the ship's planks. This suggests that as we spend more time inhabiting these curated digital bodies, our sense of self may become less of a stable, anchored entity and more of a fluid, negotiated identity that is continuously being built and rebuilt through the interplay of our physical reality and our virtual aspirations. Perhaps the most tangible, high-stakes, and direct real-world manifestation of the Ship of Theseus paradox is found in the field of art conservation and restoration. When a priceless painting, sculpture, or building is damaged by time, accident, or malice, conservators are faced with a direct Hobbesian dilemma. They must choose between two competing forms of identity and authenticity. This debate has crystallized into two primary schools of thought. The first is purism, the reassembled ship. This philosophy champions the integrity of the original material. Purists argue for minimal intervention, believing that any damage, decay, or patina acquired over time is part of the artwork's authentic history and should be preserved. The goal is to stabilize the object and prevent further degradation, but not to add new, non-original material. This view prioritizes the identity of the reassembled ship, the object composed of the original matter, however compromised it may be. The 19th century art critic John Ruskin was an arch purist, arguing that restoration was a form of deceit and that damaged buildings should be allowed to gracefully become ruins. The second is integral restoration, the repaired ship. This philosophy, heavily influenced by thinkers like Cesare Brandi and Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, prioritizes the aesthetic integrity and the artist's original intent. Proponents argue that the purpose of restoration is to reestablish the potential oneness of the work of art, allowing the viewer to experience it as the artist meant for it to be experienced. This often involves carefully adding new material to fill in losses, a process that should be discernible to experts, but that restores the visual unity of the piece. This view champions the identity of the repaired ship, the object that maintains its original form and function, even if it requires new planks. This conflict plays out in nearly every major restoration project. The cleaning of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes, 1980 to 1994, is a prime example. The restoration removed centuries of grime and varnish, revealing shockingly vibrant and brilliant colors. Supporters hailed the project for recovering Michelangelo's true palette, while critics argued that the restorers had stripped away subtle glazes and tones applied by the artist himself, thereby altering his intent and creating a version of the work that was historically inauthentic. Similarly, the restoration of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper involved removing numerous layers of previous clumsy restoration attempts, leading to a debate about whether the resulting image was a truer representation of Leonardo's work or simply a new modern interpretation. The field of art restoration powerfully demonstrates that authenticity is not a single objective property. It is a contested value. There is an authenticity of material, the original molecules of paint and canvas, and an authenticity of experience, the visual and emotional impact the artist intended. These two forms of authenticity can be, and often are, in direct opposition. A darkened, cracked, and discolored old master painting is materially authentic, but may be experientially inauthentic, as it no longer conveys the image the artist created. Conversely, a meticulously restored painting may be experientially authentic, but is, by definition, materially inauthentic. The Ship of Theseus paradox does not solve this dilemma. Instead, it clarifies the fundamental choice at its heart. It forces us to ask, what kind of authenticity do we value more in this specific cultural context? The answer is never purely philosophical. It is a complex decision informed by history, aesthetics, science, and cultural values. The ancient paradox becomes a crucial framework for navigating the difficult, value-laden choices we must make to preserve our shared cultural heritage. After sailing through the ancient origins of the paradox and exploring its modern manifestations in biology, society, and technology, the final leg of this journey involves synthesizing these diverse applications and considering the sophisticated conceptual tools that philosophers have developed to navigate these treacherous intellectual waters. The ultimate destination is not a definitive solution to the paradox, but a deeper appreciation for its enduring power as a question that illuminates the very nature of identity. The Ship of Theseus paradox arises from our intuitive, common-sense view of the world, where objects are three-dimensional things that persist, whole and entire, through time. Modern philosophy, often taking cues from advances in physics, has proposed more sophisticated models of reality that can reframe and potentially dissolve the paradox. The most prominent of these is four-dimensionalism, also known as preterentism. This theory posits that objects are not merely three-dimensional entities existing in space. Instead, they are four-dimensional space-time worms that extend through time just as they extend through space. An object, from this perspective, is the sum total of all its temporal parts, from its beginning to its end. You are not just the person you are at this instant. You are a 4D object that includes your infant self, your teenage self, and your future elderly self as distinct temporal slices of a single, larger entity. When applied to the Hobbesian dilemma, four-dimensionalism offers an elegant resolution. The Ship of Theseus is not a three-dimensional object that gets replaced. It is a single four-dimensional object, a ship history stretching through space-time. The process of replacing the planks is simply a change in the spatial parts that make up the later temporal parts of this four-dimensional object. When Hobbes's custodian builds the second ship from the old planks, this does not create a competing identity. It simply creates a new, branching 4D object. The repaired ship, Ship A, and the reassembled ship, Ship B, are not two different ships with a claim to a single identity. They are two distinct objects with different temporal histories. Ship A is the continuation of the original space-time worm, while Ship B is a new space-time worm that begins at the moment of its assembly. The paradox dissolves because the notion of a single, enduring three-dimensional object has been replaced by a more complex, four-dimensional picture of reality. Both ships can be related to the original story of Theseus, but they are not the same object in a way that creates a contradiction. This approach demonstrates how our philosophical puzzles are often contingent on our underlying assumptions about reality. By challenging our intuitive but perhaps naive view of what an object is, modern philosophical frameworks can provide new navigational charts that help us steer clear of the paradox's logical whirlpools. This deep dive into the Ship of Theseus reveals that its true power lies not in any single answer it might yield, but in its remarkable versatility as a diagnostic tool. It is a timeless question that forces us to confront and clarify our most fundamental and often unexamined assumptions about what it means to be. The solution to the paradox in any given context is never a discovery of a factual truth, but a declaration of what we value. Across every domain explored, from the biological to the corporate to the digital, the paradox compels us to choose which criteria of identity we prioritize. The identity of any ship is ultimately determined by the lens through which we choose to view it. Do we value its matter? The original planks, the unique DNA sequence, the founding employees, the first batch of code. This is a focus on material composition and historical origin. Its form? The ship's blueprint, the corporate charter, the nation's constitution, the software's architecture. This is a focus on structure, design, and abstract principles. Its function? Its ability to sail the seas, to think and feel, to generate profit, to protect its citizens. This is a focus on purpose, capability, and performance. Its history and narrative, the captain's log, the brand story, the national memory, the user's continuous experience. This is a focus on continuity, story, and subjective perception. These criteria are not mutually exclusive, but as Hobbes's dilemma brilliantly demonstrates, they can be forced into direct conflict. The choice we make reveals what is essential to us. An art conservator choosing to preserve a painting's aged material over its original appearance makes a statement about the value of historical authenticity. A nation that defines itself by its founding ideals rather than its ethnic composition makes a statement about the value of civic belonging. A person who feels their identity persists despite radical physical change makes a statement about the value of consciousness and memory. The Ship of Theseus endures because the world it describes is our own, a world of relentless flux. We are all sailors on ships whose planks are constantly being replaced, whether we are conscious of it or not. The paradox does not offer us a safe harbor or a final destination. Instead, it provides a compass. It does not tell us where to go, but it forces us to ask which direction we are heading and why. Its enduring power is the power of a fundamental question, one that challenges us in every generation and in every new context, to think deeply about who we are, what we are made of, and what it truly means to persist.